My friends, good morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Beis, Yevamos 52, and we're going to start Yevamos 53. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Nun Gimel. Yevamos 53, but we're going to start on 52b around 20 lines from the bottom. And the Gemara introduces another brayso. Tanya Idach. The brayso says, "Hacholetz liyevamaso." One who does chalitza with his yevama. After they do the chalitza, they try to betroth her. So Rebbe says in kitcho l'shem ishus, it depends what your intent was in doing the betrothal. Rebbe says if you betrothed her for the purpose of being your regular wife, then tzricha menu get. Then it's effective betrothal, and she requires a divorce from him because you're not allowed to remain married to her. But Yevamos, but if you do the betrothal for the purposes of yibum, well, that's not effective because and the Gemara is going to give 6 reasons why it's not going to be effective according to Rebbe. That if he does it for the purpose of yibum, since his intent was improper, it's not going to be a binding betrothal at that point. It doesn't matter what your intent was, whether it was for the purpose of a regular marriage, for the purpose of yibum, she's going to require a get if you do the yibum, if you do the kiddushin after the chalitza. So I'm Rabbi Yosef, my time with the Rebbe. So Rabbi Yosef says, this is the answer number 1. What's the reasoning for Rebbe? We look at this man as the equivalent legal situation to someone digging the property of a convert who died. And the convert who died's property is ownerless. Whoever does the first proprietary act on it really acquires it. But this man who does the digging on this property, kasavar shalo, he thought it was his own property. So therefore, he hasn't acquired it. The Lokani, he hasn't acquired it. So too in this situation, the person who does the betrothal, but his intent is wrong, it's not going to be a valid betrothal because he intended for yibum, and you can't do yibum at that point once you've done chalitza. Amar Abaye says, Midami. Abaye says this is not similar to the case of the person who did the proprietary act without intent. There he has no intent whatsoever to acquire it. Here his intent was to betroth her. He just had the wrong type of betrothal in mind. So the Gemara says, so rather, what's this case similar to? It's similar to the following situation. It says it's similar to somebody who's digging the property of the convert because Savar shall ger achar, but he thinks it's a different person's property. So he's doing intent, but he has the wrong type of intent. So there we say it is kona. There he has acquired the property. So therefore, this is not a good explanation for why Rebbe says you have not betrothed properly with if your intent was for yibum. So rather, the Gemara says Abaye gives a different explanation. That what's the reason why it's not binding if you do a betrothal for the purpose of yibum? It's because he says, be betrothed to me with the purpose of for a mamar yivmin. Now that's the language he uses. So Rebbe's of the position mamar ilave zika karami. The mamar is basically the act of betrothal as part of the yibum process. It's just a layer on top of the zika, on top of the yibum connection. And now that you've done the chalitza, afka also a zika. It's removed the zika, and so therefore there's nothing left to the. There's nothing left when you've done the maimer. It's not when you do the kiddushin for the yibum. There's nothing there, and so therefore it's not binding. That they're both independent. The maimer and the zika are independent. If initially it said will become betrothed to me with the kedushin of the Yevamos, it would have been effective. So too in this case also it's going to be effective. That's Abaye's explanation. Rava gives a third explanation. Rava's explanation of, again, what's the question we're dealing with? Why is Rebbe drawing a distinction if after you've done the chalitza, if you do a betrothal for the purpose of marriage, it's going to be binding and she will require a divorce. But if you do the betrothal for the purpose of Yibum, it's not binding. So Rava says, if he had said, become betrothed to me with the mimer of the Yivmin, everybody would say that language is going to be effective and she would require a divorce. He doesn't use the word mimer. Mimer is a word of betrothal. It says, become betrothed to me with the zika, with the connection of Yibum. Rebbe's suffer, now on the top of 53a, Rebbe's of the position, yesh zika, that there is a connection. And so therefore, the chalitza has removed that connection, and the asik chalitza afkiyasa was zika, and so therefore now when you see the zikas yavmin, there's nothing there, and so therefore the betrothal is not binding. Whereas Rabbanan sabri ain't zika, Rabbanan say there is no zika, it's a very weak connection, and so therefore meikara ilu amala iskachli bezikas yavamin. If he had initially used this phrase, mila mahani, would it have helped? Hashtanami mahani. So now too also. It's effective. So now we're going to see a fourth explanation. This is Rav Sharavia. Rav Sharavia says, now again, the background to Rav Sharavia is that if there's a chalitza which requires nothing after it, that's called a chalitza kshera. That's a powerful chalitza. But if there's a chalitza that, for example, still requires something after it, like for example, if the chalitza was preceded. If the chalitza was, for example, if the chalitza came after a get, so the chalitza is weaker because it had already been a partial severance of the connection, that's called the chalitza psula. So Rav Sharavia says if the chalitza was strong, if what's called the chalitza kshera, if it was a strong chalitza, and then he said to her, become betrothed to me with this Zika of Yibum, everybody's going to say, well, the strong chalitza severed the relationship. If we here we're talking about where the marriage was terminated with what's called with a chalitza psua, chalitza after a get. So therefore, marriage sever chalitza psua poteres. So one is at the position that the Rabbi would be at the position that the chalitza psua completely severs it. And there's nothing left to betroth her with. And so therefore you betroth her for Yibum, it's not going to work. Whereas the Rabbanan say, since it's chalitza psula, she still has a connection, and therefore if you betroth her for Yibum, it's going to be effective. Now we're up to the fifth answer. Rav Ashi says, everybody says that if it's a chalitza psula, the relationship is not terminated. And so, therefore, under those circumstances, the get would help. The mimer for the kedushin for Yibum would help. So Rav Ashi says, whether or not, if you put a stipulation on the chalitza, if it's still binding. So So Rebbe would be of the position that there is a tanai, that a tanai does work with the chalitza. Excuse me. The chachamim are of the position that there is a tanai with the chalitza, and so therefore, since there's a stipulation on the chalitza, if you didn't fulfill the stipulation, the chalitza is not binding, and so therefore the betrothal still takes effect. Whereas Rebbe's of the position, marasavar ain't tanai b'chalitza, and whereas Rebbe's of the position that there's no stipulation in chalitza. And you don't need to keep it. And so therefore, once you've issued this chalitza, it's still going to be effective. Whereas Ravina comes along and gives a sixth answer. He says, everybody says that you need to fulfill if you make a stipulation. We're talking about do they do it tonight? Does it need to be a double stipulation? The source of the concept of a tanai, of a stipulation being effective, comes from the biblical story at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, where Reuben and Gad and Ephraim and Asher have a stipulation with Moshe that if they go into the land as the vanguard and conquer the land, then they'll be able to settle on the eastern bank. But if they don't, then they won't be able to. So that's what's called a double stipulation. So the Talmud elsewhere discusses that any stipulation that's not a double stipulation is not a valid stipulation. So that's the argument here. One is of the position, but Tanai Kafel. Rebbe's of the position that in order for it to be a valid stipulation, it needs to be a double stipulation. Since it's not a double stipulation, therefore the chalitza is not effective, and so therefore she's still bound, and so the mimer is going to be effective. Whereas the chacham say, we don't need this double stipulation. So now we're up to the next piece. We're going through the commentary of the Mishnah. Mishnah says, that the Mishnah said that if you did chalitza and then you did mimer, that it's still going to be, and there's nothing after the chalitza. The chalitza severs the relationship. Whereas the question, why don't they also say the yibums, the bia, the intercourse, also there are two powerful acts about a yibum. There's the bia, which makes it a powerful connection and basically consummates the marriage, and the chalitza, which severs, which is like the divorce. So why do we only say that there's nothing after the chalitza, that's the complete act? Why don't we also say about the bia? Because that makes it a complete marriage. Why don't we say there's nothing after the bia that takes effect? Mara says, Abai v'Rava damar travayu tani einach bia. And indeed, Abai and Rava have a source, have a brisa where they said that the bia there's nothing that takes effect after bia. If you do a mimer with a different woman or get with a different woman, nothing takes effect after the bia. But our Mishnah, Tana Didan, doesn't list that case. Why does our Mishnah not say there's nothing after the bia? Because we're talking about a situation where we want to know what will release this woman to be able to be married into the marketplace, and that's only chalitza, because bia makes her fully married to the brother-in-law, and she'll need get a divorce after that in order to marry somebody from the marketplace. So then the Mishnah had said echad yevama achas v'echad shtei yevamos, that whether it is one yevama with echad yevama achas v'echad shtei yevamos, whether it is one woman with two men, or meaning to say with two brothers, or two yevamos with one man. Our Mishnah says that if you did mimer with one and mimer with the other, that if she does mimer with one and mimer with the other, then both require a divorce. Both require a get to terminate the mimer. So we say our Mishnah is not like Ben Azai. The Tanya Ben Azai Omer yesh mimer echad, yesh mimer achar mimer b'shnei yevama v'yevama achas. Ben Azai would say that if you have two brothers and one yevama, and they each did mimer with her, then you would require a divorce under those circumstances, because each one has the right to do a mimer. But if there's two women, two co-wives who felt even with one man, then there's no mimer achar mimer, because once you used it up, it's done, and so that's not consistent with our Mishnah. So then we had said the next line of the Mishnah was Ketzad mimer lazu, that if you do mimer to this one and then you do chalitza with that one, that the first one is going to require a get. The chalitza on the second one is not sufficient, that the first one requires a get. So Lema Masaile B'Shmuel, isn't this a support for Shmuel's position? Because what did Shmuel say? Chalitz l'balas mimer. Shmuel says that if you did chalitza with the one who got the mimer, because here we're saying that you do chalitza, you do get. We said the first one requires a get. And so here, that seems to be support for Shmuel, because Shmuel says if you do chalitza with the woman who got mimer, or niftara tzara, so that the co-wife is not exempt, because it's what's called a chalitza pesua. So isn't our Mishnah, which says they do chalitza with the second woman, isn't that a support for Shmuel? With Tiyifta de Rav Yosef, isn't it a refutation of Rav Yosef? The Gemara says no. Mikutani choletz, it doesn't say do chalitza with the second one. It says chalatz katani. if you did the chalitza with the second one, the first one is exempt, but it's diavad. It's not saying that that's the only way to do it. So it's not necessarily a support for Shmuel. And then it says in the next line, get wazu, but get wazu, that if you gave a get to one, get to the other, we're still going to say they both need tzrichos chalitza. They need chalitza. The Gemara says again, Lema Messiah Rabbi Arfuna, Dama Rabbi Arfuna, chalitza psua tzrichos sarakolacha. Maybe this is like a support for Rabbi Arfuna, because since this is a chalitza after get, it's called a chalitza psua, a weak chalitza, and there she needs chalitza from all the brothers. So to here, since they both need chalitza, isn't this a support? The Gemara says no. My trichos, don't read it that way. What it means, trichos to Alma in general in this situation, you need a chalitza. Not that they both need chalitza. Now we're just going to basically repeat it, the scenario with 2 Yevamos and 1 Yavam. So the Gemara says, cholatz. So we learned in the Mishnah, get lazu v'cholatz. So if you get to one and chalitza to the other, so again, Leim Messiah Shmuel, but you have to do Rabbi Yosef, same exact thing we just said. Mikatani cholatz katani diavad. Again, we did it b'diavad. Cholatz v'cholatz. Let's say you did chalitza followed by another chalitza, or then we say there's nothing after chalitza. Einacharei chalitza klum. That once chalitza takes effect, nothing else matters. Why not? Also, same question. Let's say nami einachar bia klum. Why don't we also say there's nothing after the bia? Abai v'Rava Damar Travayu Tani Einachar bia klum. Indeed, that's what Abai and Rava taught. There's nothing after the bia. The Tana Didan, but the author of our Mishnah says Hataras Yevamos Shukadifu. He wants to deal with situations where she's released to the marketplace. And with bia, she wouldn't be released; she'd be fully married. And then we said in our Mishnah, whether it's Yavam Echad or Shtei Yevamos, whether it's 1 Yavam to 2 Yevamos. So just as a background for this next clause is that we've seen a dispute earlier in our Talmud that once you've done chalitza with the Yevama, she is prohibited to you by the regular prohibition called lo yivne. You're not allowed to marry her. If you've done chalitza with her, you terminate the marriage, you're not allowed to marry her. What about if there are other co-wives? So Rabbi Yochanan says it's a regular prohibition with all the other co-wives, and Rish Lakish says it's a kares prohibition with all the other co-wives. Kare is obviously much more severe. So we said here in our Mishnah that if it was 1 Yavam and 2 Yevamos, then you still can't, you don't marry the other. There's nothing after. Whether once you've done chalitza and then you try to do an act on the other one, it's not effective. So Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan, I have to tell you that if you try to betroth her after you've done chalitza, if you try to betroth wife number 2 after you've already done chalitza with wife number 1, it makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says Kua Beisa Belav. He says all the other wives are prohibited just by regular prohibition. So Itzrach so it needs to tell us that it's not effective. Then Kedushin Tovsim because we're learning that since it's a regular betrothal, it's not going to take effect, even though it's just a regular prohibition. Now Rish Lakish, the Amar Kua Beisa Bekaris Kai, but according to Rish Lakish, who says that the prohibition now is kares, Itzrach Hashmina and then Kedushin Tovsim Christus. Why would the mission need to teach us that there's no betrothal by a kares penalty? It's like a kares penalty is like a familial relationship. Of course, those marriages are not going to take effect. So Rish Lakish says, no, your reasoning is wrong. According to your logic, Seifa, the concluding clause, the Katani Baal Basar Maimer, where it says that, let's say he has Bia with the first woman, and then brother number 2 comes along and tries to betroth her. Of course, it's not going to take effect, but yet the Mishnah specifies it doesn't take effect. But why do we need to tell that? Itzrich Lashminan, does it need to tell us the Kedushin Tosim Be'ishes Ish? Does it need to tell us that it's not a valid marriage there? She's already married to somebody else. So it's rather but rather, since the source states how 1 Yavam and 1 Yavama gets released. It tells us also the case about 2 Yevamos and 1 Yavam. So even though it wasn't necessary, it listed all these things because that's just the way the Mishnah was formulating it. Now the top of 53b, we said Cholatz Asa Maimer. Let's say he did chalitza and then he did maimer or gave her a get or he had bia, that we say there's nothing after the chalitza. And here we're talking about one yavam and one yevama. And so the Gemara says, Bishlam chalatz v'asam maimer. I understand if he gave her chalitza and then he did a betrothal. I understand we have to tell her that the betrothal there is not valid. Sagdai the chamina, you might have thought nigzer maimer devas chalitza. Atu maimer to come make chalitza. We might have said we'll make a decree, and we'll say we have to worry that you should get a get after it, because just like you would get a get if the maimer was done before the chalitza. So we say you don't make such a decree. But why does our Mishnah have to tell us that if you gave her chalitza and then you gave her a get, that get is useless? She's already divorced from you. Why do we need that case? It's completely irrelevant. According to your logic, the next clause, that if you betrothed her, if you had intercourse, you did the yibum, and bia v'asa maimer, and then you betrothed her, that the mimer is useless. Bal v'nasa and get, ema seva bal v'asa maimer, bal v'nasa and get. That in the concluding clause talks about a case where you did bia followed by a mimer, or bia followed by a get, then under those circumstances, that what's the purpose? In both of these cases, there's nothing takes effect after bia, meaning to say the mimer is useless, and also the get it's irrelevant. Of course, we already know that we already know all those laws. So the Gemara says, Bishlam above and us and get. I understand why the Mishnah tells us that if he gave her a get, it's teaching us the law there that she's divorced. I understand why that's up. That the Chamina, you might have thought, Nigzer get to Basar Be'ila to get to Kame Be'ila. You might have thought we're not going to say that she's completely divorced if the get happens after the Bia, because if the get happens before the Bia, she's not completely separated, because she would still require a Chalitza. So Kamash Malad, the little Gazrina. So we say we don't make such a decree. But the Bia followed by the betrothal, that's completely useless. Which they're already married. No, so just because we're already talking about where you did chalitza followed by mimer, we'll also say where you did bia followed by mimer, right? So meaning to say they talk cases that aren't relevant, because the totality of the cases is going to be one situation where it's relevant. So we had learned that in our Mishnah that said there's nothing that whenever chalitza happens, our Mishnah says it completely terminates the relationship. But bia is only most powerful if it's the first thing that's done. If it was done after a maimer or after a get, you're still going to require a chalitza after. So our Mishnah is the Loki Aitana. Our Mishnah is not like the following source. Titania, Abi Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir. This opinion of Abi Yossi, son of Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim, he said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Achas Bila v'Achas Chalitza. He said that bia is just like chalitza, that ein acharei klum, that whenever it's done, it's the most powerful. But if it's done at the outset, both bia and chalitza are completely powerful. But the chalitza also is like the bia, that if it's in the middle or the end, it's not so powerful that you can do other actions after and they'll take effect. It's a three-way dispute. The Tanakama of our Mishnah is other position, Bia the Iko Migzar, because Bia we're concerned that problems could happen. So therefore, Gazrina Chalitza, we make such a decree. But Chalitza, the Iko Migzar, but Chalitza, we're not concerned. Well, Gazrina, we don't make such a decree. Rabbi Nechemiah's other position, Bia nami leiko migzar, that we don't need to make a decree about the bia either. The karmas ligzar bia achar get mishum bia achar chalitza. You say no, we should make a decree that about bia after a get that you should require chalitza because of bia after chalitza. So, given the chalitza diaraisa, since chalitza is biblical, made the people know the distinction. The karmas ligzar bia achar maimer mishum bia achar bia. And there too, if you want to say make a decree about bia after maimer because of bia after bia, no, even the bia diaraisa, Hamedi Yadi. People know because Bia is biblical. And Abi Yossi comes along with the third position. Abi Yossi Bechanan Savak Rabbanan, because of Bia, because of Chalitza Misham Bia. So he makes a decree on both Bia and Chalitza. But and now we start the 6th chapter of the tractate, which is a classic chapter, a lot of discussion about it. And this is going to talk about the issue of, we start off with the question of intent. We know that the Yibum is a sexual act. That's what consummates the marriage between the brother and the sister-in-law, the brother and the widow of his deceased brother. So what's the level of intent that's required? And then we're going to talk about the intent in the sexual act in general. What's the level that's required? So it says our Mishnah, Aval Yevamos, somebody who has a sexual act with his Yevama, i.e. with his brother's widow, Bein B'Shogeg, whether he does it accidentally. How do you do it accidentally? The Rashi tells us he thinks she's his wife, or he thinks it's another woman. He doesn't realize it's his brother's widow. Or Bein B'Mezid, or whether he does it purposely. What does that mean? B'Mezid, Mezid implies guilt. It means he was with his brother's widow, but he didn't do it for the purpose of the mitzvah. He was with her, just wanted to have a sexual experience with her. Mein ba'ones, or whether he did it ba'ones. Ones means he was under duress, meaning to say he was forced into it. He was compelled. Or bein b'ratzon. So ratzon here is a question if it even means anything. So it's oftentimes in the Shas that b'ratzon is just thrown in as being the opposite of anos or similar to mezid, means say he did it willingly. So whether he did it under duress or whether he did it willingly, whether he was accidental and she was intentional, or who mezid he's intentional and she's accidental. Who anos he did it under duress and she was not under duress. The Talmud is going to discuss how can you have a sexual act under duress. The Talmud is going to for a man. The Talmud says he anus anus. She is under duress and he's not under duress. Whether he just initiated the sexual act but didn't complete it, or whether he completed the sexual act. All these cases, the yibum is going to be binding, it's consummating. It's consummated. And we're not going to draw distinctions between the types of the sexual act. Rashi says whether it's what's called the regular sexual act or the irregular sexual act. Usually refers to the anal intercourse, or whether it was just the initiation of the sexual act or the completion of the sexual act. Nevertheless, in all these cases, the marriage is consummated. So to somebody who has this type of sexual relationship with any one of the people who are prohibited to him by a relative in the Torah, opsuos, or disqualified to be with a Kohen, could go like a widow with the high priest, or grusha v'chalutza Kohen hedjot, or a divorcee, or a chalutza with a regular Kohen, mamzeres and asino Yisrael, or a mamzeres, when people are not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, a woman who is a mamzeres or a nesina to the Jewish people, or Baal Yisrael, a mamzer or nasin, or a daughter or a Jew with a mamzer, a Jewish woman with a mamzer or nasin, pasla. In all these cases, whenever the sexual act happened, it's going to disqualify her from marrying a Kohen. There's no exemption for there's no loopholes for a different type of sexual act. No matter the sexual act, we're going to say it's going to disqualify her. And also in the other case, the marriage will be consummated. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with this chapter, but we will